Welcome to Preacher Handshake, the podcast where we talk about all things preaching with some of our favorite preachers and we dig deeper into some of their favorite sermons. We're your hosts, Hannah and Evan.
There are a lot of podcasts out there that have resources for preparing sermons, and those are wonderful. But there's not as many resources that help us reflect on sermons that we've already preached, or reflect on good preaching, or hear good preaching. So Hannah and I met doing ministry together, and we were in this experience of collaborative preaching. So it came out of a need for there to be multiple preachers in the church that we were at, and in the college ministry as well that we were helping to lead. And so it was a chance to elevate different voices and to hear from each other and to preach collaboratively. So we were writing sermons together and thinking together, but then on the Tuesdays after every Sunday, we would sit down in our group of our teaching team and we'd pick apart, challenge, question, wrestle with the sermon that came before. And it was this great exercise of getting to have some real feedback that you don't really get in ministry life. Since then, Hannah and I have moved on to different things, but we've continued to be kind of obsessed with this idea of collaborative preaching and talking about preaching and the craft of preaching. And for me, as somebody who's now the only full-time staff at a smaller church, I don't have a lot of opportunities to get to be around other preachers, especially, and hear them preaching because I'm preaching most Sundays. And so here's this opportunity to talk to other preachers, hear their sermons, pick it apart, and that's what this is all going to be about. You don't have to be a preacher to get something out of these conversations. We're going to explore how we think and talk about God in all kinds of different ways. And our guests are really cool and really smart, and they're going to share lots of resources and lots of insight and reflect on all the questions they're asking and all that they bring on some of their favorite sermons that they've already preached.
Yeah, we're so excited to get to have these conversations. I know that I have definitely been missing some of this, like diving deeper into sermons, and I love hearing good preaching. And sometimes I don't always know who's out there to listen to. So I think this is another opportunity for us to just be exposed to more preaching. We chose the name Preacher Handshake because we wanted it to feel a lot like a conversation. And for anyone who's preached, usually the feedback that you're getting from your message comes from the line that happens at the end of the service where people are coming up and shaking the preacher's hand and saying, "Good job, good sermon," or asking follow-up questions for what they did or didn't like about the sermon. And so we were thinking through that idea a little bit and wanted to have kind of a lengthier opportunity to talk to some of our favorite preachers and give them sort of a metaphorical handshake and say, hey, here's some of the things that we liked. Here's some of the things we have questions about. Talk to us about your process and how this sermon landed for you and good things like that.
I love this opportunity to really get to ask these questions. And, as a in seminary, when you're learning how to preach, you're often in a preaching class that then after you preach in class, like everybody shares and you talk and you really wrestle through it. And then you go to actually start preaching in churches, and the only interaction you often have is that handshake. And it's a, good sermon, all right, have a good day kind of thing. And so there's not as much opportunity for like real feedback. You might get it in an email, but usually those aren't always the most constructive. Sometimes they are. Um, and so that's the format of this podcast is we're going to ask our guests about a sermon that they've preached that was meaningful to them, or some of them are going to say, hey, you pick one. And we're going to take that sermon and we're going to provide it for you in the show notes. If you want to listen ahead of time, that's fantastic. But we're going to highlight some clips throughout the conversation and just pick it apart together, ask questions about it every week, and really try to get in the mindset of the preacher and understand that both their process and everything that they brought with them as they crafted and delivered their message.
So you may be asking yourself, who are Hannah and Evan? Why do we care? Why should we listen to them? And the answer is we're just a bunch of preaching nerds. Truly. We fell in love with the craft of preaching and have decided to stick with it. One of the questions that we are going to be asking our guests is, why does preaching matter? And I think that's a question that is deeply important for both of us and also just for the moment that we're in with churches and the reality of what being in a church looks like. I have loved preaching. I've been uh, able to be kind of an itinerant preacher for the last 6 years or so, working in various jobs. And it's one of those things that I continue to be fascinated by the craft of preaching. I love sitting down and digging into a text and thinking about the ways that this applies to congregations, to people, to the realities of the world we live in. And I think that preaching really matters. But at the end of the day, I think I am just deeply curious to know the ways that people are engaging with scripture and the ways that scripture is being taught and preached. I think that's a fascinating process, and it's one that really excites me to dig into more.
Yeah, like I said, Hannah and I met. I was leading a college ministry, and Hannah became one of our interns, and then eventually I became the teaching pastor at this church, and then she came onto our teaching team, and I've been preaching and doing ministry for a while. It was not something I planned on doing. Um, I was really into the more like academic side of studying the Bible, but when I found myself in seminary, I just really fell in love with preaching, with trying to communicate and take the beauty and the complexity and the challenges that we find in Scripture and in our world, and just try to navigate those things together in a community. Since that time where we were together on a staff at a church, we've gone to different places. Hannah's doing some more school. I'm doing a little bit more school, and I'm now pastoring a smaller church in the Philadelphia suburbs. And just kind of to orient yourself to kind of where I'm at. My church and my ordination is with the American Baptist Churches USA, and my church is also connected with the Alliance of Baptists and the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. And I have some connections as well with the Post-Evangelical Collective and some of the emerging things that we're seeing in our time where there's lots of questions about church and authority. Um, and that's part of what we're going to explore too. This preaching thing comes bundled with it all kinds of questions about who are these people who are talking, who are they to speak for God, right? What kind of authority do they have and how are they using it? Um, how has the abuse of authority by so many religious leaders and pastors impact how we think about preaching? I really believe that preaching needs to be more and more shared and collaborative to protect us from some of that stuff, some of that mess of elevating one person and one voice too much. And I'm really hopeful that conversations like this help us get there.
And Evan, you mentioned that we're both still in school. And one of the things that I'm studying right now is looking at kind of the way that this collaborative preaching works today. And one of the things that I'm deeply fascinated by in the things that I'm studying is the way that we are relating the things that we're learning in an academic setting to the general public. And one of the conversations I have a lot with people is I'm somebody who spent a lot of time in a classroom. I've spent a lot of time thinking about things and reading dead theologians. And at the end of the day, what does that mean for the people that I'm serving, the people in my community? And I think that's a really important question. And one of the ways that preaching for me helps connect those two realities. That sometimes it's kind of connecting the things that I'm learning and the things that I'm doing. It's not just about the theology, it's also the practice and bringing those two things together. And preaching for me is one of the most practical ways I think that we can do that. Um, it's an avenue to say that it's all well and good if you can read something in Hebrew, but if it doesn't mean something for the people that we're serving or the people that we're encountering in life, I'm not sure how much it means, to be honest. And so that's kind of my conviction for it, and one of the reasons why I think preaching is so important and why I care about it.
Hannah, we are recording across some time zones, so I'm going to let you, because you're not going to tell people without somebody asking you. But where are you?
Oh
Where are
my
you
goodness.
studying? I think it's cool.
Yeah, you know me too well. It I am currently in Edinburgh, Scotland. I am working on a second master's because I'm a glutton for punishment. But working specifically here, I was blessed to receive a scholarship to come and to study preaching specifically at the university. So I am right now in this beautiful city and am enjoying life here. It's very cold and very rainy, but I'm getting to have conversations with some of the world's leading scholars and talk all things homiletics and theology. Um, and it's great and it's beautiful and it's challenging. But I'm loving it. So thanks for making me tell people that.
Good stuff. Yeah. So excited that we can have these conversations and continue to think about the importance of preaching. And I think about just the value that it is to hear from these different voices and the different kind of voices that we're going to hear from. You know, when I was interviewing to come to the church where I'm at, one of the questions was something like describe like the your ideal Sunday or like a Sunday that's gone like, oh, that was really good. Can you think of one that was really good? And I immediately did. And the Sunday that I thought of was actually a Sunday where Hannah was preaching and I wasn't on a Sunday morning. And it's not to like make Hannah's head and big or anything, because it's less to do with Hannah individually and more to do with the sharing of the pulpit and the elevation of other voices. And so for me, that Sunday was particularly impactful because it was about elevating somebody else's voice. It was about hearing a fresh perspective. It was about being shaped by somebody else and seeing how they are being shaped by God. And so when I think about why I care about preaching and why I think this is important, part of it is the craft and the things that I'm doing in my community with the actual sermon, but it's also about how are we helping other people discover their voice, see what God is saying to them, and share that. And that just gets me really excited. And I really can't wait to learn from all these other folks who we're going to talk to and the ways that they've been shaped by preaching too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say that because for me, one of the things that's cool about having multiple voices or listening to different preachers is the embodiment aspect, right? I think so often churches are used to hearing one type of person preach. And I think it's really beautiful and really beneficial when we can hear from a whole host of other voices who represent different perspectives and different realities. And I'm really excited to have conversations with people who love preaching and also have vastly different life experiences than I do. It's one of my favorite things to say the way to see the way that they are embodying what they're learning through preaching. So we have some exciting guests. Should we talk about them?
Yeah, I'm very excited about some of the folks that we're going to talk to. And the way this is going to work is starting in March, we're going to release an episode every 2 weeks, and we're going to operate in kind of a season format. So we're working on 6 episodes here for the spring. We'll share some about some of the guests we've got lined up for that. And so that first Thursday in March, which will be a week after this episode goes out, that's when those episodes will drop every 2 weeks. And you can find it on all the places where there are podcasts, and I hope that you'll subscribe and hear from these awesome guests. Hannah, why don't you tell us about the first guest that we'll be sharing from?
Yeah, so our first guest is Andy Pelliser. She is the pastor at UBC Waco, University Baptist Church in Waco. And I kind of have known of her for a little while and was so excited to say, come on, let's talk, let's get to know you. And she did not disappoint. She ended up saying she wanted us to review a sermon that is one of both of our favorite scriptures, I think. And so that was really cool and just a unique experience. So I think Andy's going to be super fun to listen to.
Yeah, we're also going to be talking to Zach Lambert from Restore Austin. He's also the co-founder of the Post Evangelical Collective, and Zach's voice is one that we need right now, and one that more and more people are discovering. You likely are just seeing things that he's saying or posting on your social media feeds if you're in those spaces. I think he's a pioneer for us today and what it looks like to be an inclusive community, but also one that has some of the kind of flavor and stylings of whatever has been going on in maybe the modern evangelical church in the last 20 years. Some of that style without some of the baggage and with a inclusive, affirming theologic framework underneath it. And he's a phenomenal preacher, and I can't wait for us to talk to him. Another guest is my friend, James Williams from First Baptist Church of Philadelphia. James is just one of the best pastors I know. He's so caring and kind and brilliant. And I can't wait for you to hear from him as well.
Yeah, and we've got some other exciting guests that we'll be teasing, I think, as the season goes along. But we're really excited for you to hear from all of these different voices and to kind of listen into the conversations we're having with some really awesome preachers.
So next Thursday, our first episode will drop with Andy Pellissier, and we hope that you'll listen, subscribe. If you have any questions or if you know a preacher that you think we've got to talk to, please reach out to us. There will be an email for you to contact in the show notes. We hope that you'll join us for our first episode of Preacher Handshake next week.